Every election, every parliament, every vote you have ever cast traces back to one city, one experiment, one radical idea that a group of ancient Greeks had around 507 BC. That ordinary people, not kings, not gods, not generals, should decide how they are governed. They called it demokratia, rule by the people. It was the most revolutionary political idea in human history. And from the very beginning, it was deeply, fundamentally flawed. This is the story of how democracy was actually invented and why its creators would barely recognize what we call democracy today. This is the Media Digest, where history meets the headlines. To understand what made democracy so radical, you have to understand what came before it. Athens in the 6th century BC was ruled by aristocrats, wealthy, powerful families who controlled the land, the courts, and the government. The poor had no voice. Debt was so crushing that many Athenians sold themselves or their children into slavery just to survive. The city was permanently on the edge of violent revolution. In 594 BC, a man named Solon was given emergency powers to reform the system. He canceled all debts, freed debt slaves, and reorganized Athenian society into classes based on wealth rather than birth. It was not democracy, but it cracked the door open. The idea that the system could be changed, that ordinary people had rights worth protecting, had entered the Athenian imagination. It would not leave. The man who actually invented democracy was not who most people expect. His name was Cleisthenes, an aristocrat, ironically, from one of Athens' most powerful families. In 508 BC, after a period of political chaos and tyranny, Cleisthenes proposed a system so radical that it fundamentally restructured Athenian society from the ground up. He divided Athens into 139 local units called demes, essentially neighborhoods. Every male citizen was registered in a deme, regardless of his wealth or family connections. From these demes, representatives were chosen by lottery, not election, to serve on a council of 500 that governed Athens day to day. Once a year, every male citizen over 18 could walk into the agora, the public square, and vote directly on the laws that govern their lives. No representatives, no parliament, no intermediaries. Direct democracy. Every man, his own legislator. The Athenians called it the greatest political achievement in human history. And in many ways, they were right. Athenian democracy was unlike anything the modern world practices today. Modern democracy is representative. You elect someone to make decisions on your behalf. Athenian democracy was direct. You made the decisions yourself. The assembly, called the ecclesia, met 40 times a year on a hillside called the Pnyx, overlooking the city. Any male citizen could attend, speak, and vote. On a good day, 6,000 citizens would show up. They debated and voted on everything: declarations of war, foreign policy, public spending, legal changes, military appointments. The debates were open, loud, and sometimes brutal. Any citizen could accuse any leader of corruption or incompetence. Any citizen could propose a new law. The system was designed specifically to prevent any single person from accumulating too much power. They even had a mechanism for this, called ostracism. Once a year, citizens could vote to exile any individual they felt had become too powerful or too dangerous to the democracy. The person with the most votes was banished from Athens for 10 years. No trial, no appeal, just leave. But here is what the history books often leave out. Athenian democracy was not democracy for everyone. Of Athens' estimated population of 300,000 people, only around 30,000 were eligible to participate in the democracy. Women could not vote. Slaves, who made up roughly a third of the entire population, could not vote. Foreign residents who had lived in Athens for generations could not vote. The democracy that the ancient Greeks invented and celebrated was built on the labor of hundreds of thousands of people who who had absolutely no voice in it whatsoever. The men who stood in the agora debating freedom and equality owned slaves. The philosophers who wrote about the rights of citizens kept women locked out of public life entirely. Aristotle, one of the greatest minds in human history, wrote that some people were naturally suited to be slaves. This was not a contradiction the Athenians struggled with. It was simply the world as they saw it. And it is the deepest flaw at the heart of democracy's origin story. Despite its contradictions, Athenian democracy produced one of the most extraordinary cultural explosions in human history. Under the leadership of Pericles in the 5th century BC, Athens built the Parthenon. It produced Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. It gave the world tragedy and comedy as art forms. It pioneered history, medicine, mathematics, and philosophy. The Athenians were not just governing themselves, they were thinking about the world in ways that had never been attempted before. The freedom that democracy created, even an imperfect exclusionary freedom, unleashed a level of human creativity and intellectual output that shaped Western civilization for the next 2,500 years. Athenian democracy lasted less than 200 years in its original form. It was weakened by the devastating Peloponnesian War against Sparta, which drained Athens of resources, manpower, and confidence. It was suspended twice, once by an oligarchic coup in 411 BC, and again in 404 BC when Sparta imposed the 30 tyrants on a defeated Athens. Each time the Athenians fought to restore it. But the democracy that emerged from these crises was never quite as bold or as direct as the one Cleisthenes had invented. And in 322 BC, following the conquests of Alexander the Great and the rise of Macedonian power, Athenian democracy was finally extinguished. The experiment was over, but the idea, the radical, flawed, world-changing idea that people should govern themselves, was already loose in the world. And it has never stopped spreading. The democracy Athens invented was imperfect from its very first day. It excluded women, it was built on slavery, and it executed its greatest philosopher, Socrates, for asking too many uncomfortable questions. And yet the core idea it placed into human civilization, that power belongs to the people and not to kings, changed everything that came after it. Every democracy that exists today, however imperfect, however corrupted, however far from its ideals, carries the DNA of that hillside in Athens where ordinary men first stood up and said, "We decide." This has been the Media Digest. Stay sharp.